I'm Rabbi Andrew Ergist. It's my pleasure to greet you and welcome you to this briefing. I'm the CEO of Hebrew at the Center, and I am calling in from Israel. This morning, I was had the lovely opportunity to spend some time at the Shuk and to see sufganiyot everywhere as Israel prepares for Hanukkah. And it's always an important reminder, even though this has been a very dark year plus for our people, even in times of darkness, we're reminded about the Festival of Lights and our ability to triumph over all types of hardships and challenges. And we hope that the light brings illumination and insight. Pritzat Derech, Hebrew for All, our field-wide initiative to help Jewish day school students with dyslexia and language-based learning differences, is absolutely about bringing light. It's about illuminating, making certain that students have the opportunity not only to begin their Hebrew journey with joy, but understand that their Hebrew journey leads them onto their Jewish learning, their sense of Jewish connection and commitment, their sense of being welcomed and included in our Jewish community. And while we want to make certain that all students have that opportunity, we also want to make certain that every student who doesn't have those challenges realizes that ours is a community of inclusion. We're going to start our briefing with a brief word from one of the people who set this all in motion, Joe Canfor, whose beloved wife, Pamela Canfor, passed away. And in reflecting on how he would like to remember her, he mentioned to Arnie Winchell, the board president of Hebrew at the Center, is there something we might be able to do to help students with dyslexia and Hebrew? And thus was born this event. So with that, I'd like to turn it over and we'll hear a few words from Joe.
My name is Joe Canfor. My wife, Pam Canfor, of blessed memory, was a day school teacher and principal for well over 30 years. She also was a dyslexia specialist and spent her life teaching children how to read in English and teaching children with the same learning difficulties how to read Hebrew. She had to create her own materials in Hebrew as there were no available materials. Now, Hebrew at the Center is taking a systematic approach to help children with learning difficulties to learn Hebrew. This is important not simply because they have a greater facility with Hebrew, but because so often they are dropping out of day school or avoiding Jewish text and avoiding Jewish involvement because of their feeling of insufficiency in Hebrew. Luckily, Hebrew is a phonetic language, and this can be done even more easily than English, but it takes a systematic approach which does not today exist and which is being put together by Hebrew at the Center, so that this can go to scale, so that children across our system, in day schools and other learning environments, can learn and feel comfortable with their Hebrew language. I saw so many children succeed, and I know it's possible, and I know that this work that Hebrew the language is doing with the highest professionalism will help. What we need to do is get behind this and support this and bring these children whose problems sometimes are not as obvious, and simply we think they're avoiding Hebrew when in fact they need this deep help. I hope you will all contribute to this effort by bringing this to the attention of those who can help us take this wide and scale the ability to read Hebrew for all of our children.
A quick overview. We're going to have a pretty extraordinary panel of individuals representing organizations that are part of the Pritzat Derech planning team. We'll hear from Paul Bernstein, the CEO of Prisma, from Dr. Esti Gross, the Chief of Staff and Director of Education for Hebrew at the Center, Dr. Scott Goldberg, Professor at Azrieli and the head of Madik, Alana Ruske-Kidd, the head of school at the Shefa School and at the Shefa Center. We'll have an opportunity for some Q&A with Dr. Sarah Rubinson-Levy, the project coordinator, and we'll conclude with some reflections from Abby Pitkowski, the program director from the Covenant Foundation. We'd like to turn it over to Paul Bernstein, CEO of Prisma.
Andrew, thank you. And thank you to Hebrew at the Center, not just for bringing us together today, but also for your leadership in the initiative. And I'm also very grateful to all the partners who have come together. It's been wonderful to see the collaboration that's developed out of this. Also, I want to say thank you to Joe. I mean, one of the things that inspired me when this idea first came up was listening to Joe and listening to his children as well talk about Pam's dedication and her passion as a teacher. And not only that, as he described, the way she elevated and focused on supporting diverse learners, and in particular, learners with dyslexia. I found that continually inspiring, and I'm very grateful to, since she passed away, to have learned more about Pam's life and her passion and how it inspires us now. So in her memory, what better way to move forward than to dedicate to this work? And doing this and the conversation we're having today is coming at exactly the right time. You may have seen Bob Lichtman's article in E-Jewish Philanthropy this morning, where he wrote that day schools are the most important asset in our community. Day schools are our lifeblood. It's a moment for us to really advance the case for day schools right across the Jewish community. And similarly, recently in commentary, Bret Stephens talked about we need a whole of American Jewry effort after October the 7th. And the first thing he listed in that effort was to make high quality Jewish day school education available and affordable to every Jewish family that wants one. It's that value statement that animates us all the time and in this conversation. It's why this work matters. Right now at Prisma, we are really focusing on the opportunity for enrollment growth for day schools. And as we know, the number of children with learning disabilities has grown tremendously in the last few decades, and that language-based disabilities, including dyslexia, are the most common among those. So if we are going to live our values to serve all families, and if we're going to live our families as Jewish day schools, placing Ivrit at the heart of the education that we provide, it's on all of us, I think, to seize the moment that presents to strengthen day schools at the heart of our community, to strengthen the teaching and learning we're able to provide for all students, and to be able to include more students and so increase enrollment and increase our ability to retain the students that want to be in our system with their diverse learning needs, and to live the Jewish day schools by strengthening Ivrit. That's very much the way forward. It's a privilege for us to be able to be part of this initiative, and it's great to see so many people on this call. I wanted just to mention Prisma's new Director of Educational Excellence, Deborah Drang, who's here, who brings an incredible passion for student support and inclusion, and will within our team be leading our work going forward. So thank you to Hebrew at the Center. Thank you to all the partners. It's great to be with you.
Paul, thank you, and thank you for your leadership. We're now pleased to hear from Dr. Esti Gross.
Shalom, boker tov, tzorayim tovim. And so I will share with you a little bit more practical steps we took thus far. But a little bit before that, just a quick reminder of what Pritzat Derech initiative is. It's designed to literally break through, bringing together the various stakeholders to surface existing field knowledge, identify effective practice, develop necessary tools, and embed expertise that then can be deployed throughout the community, all to ensure that students with dyslexia and language learning challenges have access to Hebrew language, to Judaism, and to their Jewish identity. And now I'll share with you a timeline. And even though this timeline really is so detailed and reflects 18 months of work done thus far, I will walk us through the highlights of two key phases, the discovery phase and the development phase. So the discovery phase. With the seed funding from Lippman Canfor Family Foundation, Hebrew at the Center in spring 2023 launched the discovery phase by gathering a planning team consisting, as you've heard, of experts from Gateway, Madik, Prisma, Shefa Center, to then hire the project coordinator, Dr. Sarah Rubinson-Levy. We also brought together a large circle of experts on dyslexia, reading, Hebrew language pedagogy, professional training, best practices, which we call the working group. The main goal of this phase was to foster open communication and dialogue among silos, among various experts and stakeholders who represent different field perspectives to better understand what we know and what we don't know. Our task was to gather research on the science of reading, strategies used in Israel for students with these kind of challenges, learning Hebrew as a second language or first language, research on dyslexia and its intersection with second language learning, and how day school students encounter both sacred and modern Hebrew in practice in their classrooms. This work was done between and during 2 convenings with the working group. Progress was also made in creating a document that is the basis for what will be a field guide for day school leaders looking for thorough but accessible, understandable guidance to help them better understand and communicate the needs of this important population, and then implement key system type strategies to help create a more inclusive Jewish community and that can effectively serve more students and more Jewish families. Along the way, this initiative sparked a discussion, as we see here that you are here, sparked an interest in the broader community and garnered a covenant grant, which, coupled with other financial support, enabled the development and pilot readiness phases. So the development phase is, we are currently wrapping up this phase, which was launched in March 2024. The main goal of this phase was to continue to close the knowledge gaps and gain further clarity about, and then to develop the training and the tools for change. Since our team takes our role very seriously, we decided to include 3 key short-term research projects in addition to the lit review, which you will hear more about from Dr. Scott Goldberg. This phase also includes identifying 2 to 3 pilot communities for intervention. We've identified those communities, and we are in the process of finalizing the selection of the pilot schools within those communities. The pilot readiness phase will take place in schools where there already exists a culture of cross-school collaboration and partnership with an effective central agency or a partner that works well with all community schools. This work also led to the creation of a theory of change, an approach that can be piloted in schools. We're also in the process of developing the training programs and materials for the mentors, the classroom Hebrew teachers, and leaders and school reading specialists. The team has also developed something, a job description for mentors, but also a new job description for a new position, which we call the professional Hebrew reading specialist, who is a synthesis really of all those areas of knowledge and expertise. The community mentor is a credentialed reading specialist or a Hebrew language professional who will be trained in additional skills that are not part of their previous education. They will then collaborate with the central agency and introduce and test new classroom materials in the selected schools, conduct baseline student assessment, help us monitor the progress, lead professional development for teachers and specialists, and they will also work with the school leadership to support the initiative and help prepare other schools in the community towards a more robust implementation. And the mentors will receive ongoing supports from the initiative leadership and will assist in gathering the data for evaluation and refining the program for it to go to scale. That's about it, about these 2 phases. If you have questions, we'll have time later on. Thank you. תודה.
Thank you, Esty. It's now my pleasure to bring in Dr. Scott Goldberg.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to partner with Hebrew at the Center and to see so many familiar faces here who have supported Jewish education broadly, as well as Hebrew reading and Hebrew language for so many years. My task today is, in a short period of time, to share with you what we've been doing in terms of research. There are really three parts of that, as was mentioned: a case study, quantitative empirical study, and a literature review, and we'll take each in turn. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, we're not going to share every detail of the work, but I wanted to share with you some sense of what it is that we've done and what it is that we've found. And I think that the two overarching realities of the case study, where we went into the field and had interviews with practitioners who are day in and day out working with children with language-based learning disabilities and other challenges in terms of reading outcomes in various schools throughout the country, that what we have found is that there are a lot of people who are doing a lot of really wonderful things in silos. And they are not necessarily collaborating in a way in which would yield some thematic approaches that would, in fact, support all children to read Hebrew throughout and to learn language throughout our schools. So it is important to us to realize, I think, that that is an important takeaway. While it is that we don't have themes that come through and say, here's what's going on in the field today, per se, in detail, what we do find is that people are really doing their own thing and really constructing their own thing, which is also important, which is there's a lot of people reinventing the wheel. There's not conversations that are starting with what does the research say as we're going to see why it is that we did these other studies of a lit review and the empirical work. What do we know? What do we need to know? And how are we going to collaborate and be convened like Hebrew at the Center is doing here in terms of sharing and learning together? But there's not only silos, but there's a lot of work that's going on that is not necessarily advancing us to support children, not necessarily advancing us to have reading specialists who are consistently trained with certain standards. To develop a field here, we need common language, we need to have common approaches, evidence-based practices, we need to have a number of these pieces, and right now we do not have all of those in place. So while it is that it might be a sad result of the reality of the case study, it is nonetheless a result. Just to fast forward to the empirical work, it is a very exciting time for us because we were able to, with some outcome data that we have, look at many children across many different schools to understand the nature of the problem. And while it is that some might look at this and say this is somewhat of a minimal finding in some ways, I think it's really important to contextualize one of the findings, at least from the empirical work. In 1984, literally 40 years ago, Keith Stanovich at the University of Toronto at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at OISE coined a phrase or a term called the Matthew effect. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer, from the Gospel of Matthew, not something often quoted in Jewish education context, but I'll nonetheless quote it and cite it as the reality that in reading, particularly, that reality happens. Over the course of first through many years later, the gap between those who are typically developing readers and those who are struggling readers continues to grow. We haven't had empirical research to support that in Hebrew. 40 years later, we now do. Because of this work, because of Hebrew at the Center convening this group, we were able to look, and particularly I share with you some second grade data that suggests that typically developing readers are in second grade particularly 3.3 times or have a greater reading rate than 3.3 times that of higher risk readers. That is a significant difference. 20 words read correctly per minute, for example, versus 6 words read correctly per minute. And when we think about that and we see that that's second grade already, that's not at the beginning of reading, that's second grade. And that trajectory will continue likely to grow, or the gap will continue to grow. We need to realize that we need to intervene as early as possible with evidence-based approaches to be able to support children with language-based learning disabilities. In terms of our literature review, I want to share with you some highlights there as well, because here we were really trying to synthesize 4 disparate parts or bodies of research: the science of reading English, and also other languages, including Israeli approaches for Hebrew, but also language-based learning disabilities such as dyslexia, second language learning, and also modern and sacred text reading of Hebrew, different Hebrews, as we call them at Hebrew at the Center and in our project. And therefore, when we think about that, those various bodies of research don't necessarily speak to each other. They might have some overlap, but oftentimes people are trained in one and not the other. People are reading one and not the other. And I want to share with you a practical example of how this impacts children with language-based learning disabilities in our schools. Because if we would just look at the science of reading English and learning disability education, we would conclude that we need to be able to make sure that all children are really strong in what's called phonemic awareness. They would have to learn phonemes, the smallest unit of sound in a language. And if we would just look at that English literature and just look at work on learning disability education, that's what we would do. We would start with a word in Hebrew, and we would just break it down to the smallest units, each individual sound. While it is that up until 2021, there was a debate. There were people who were saying, no, actually, we should teach at the syllable level, consonants and vowels, and all sorts of other levels. And that's how we should intervene. We should teach typically, and we should also teach high-risk readers the same way. 2021, Sargiani and Eri studying Portuguese, not English, not Hebrew. So you say, what does Portuguese have anything to do with this project, Scott? You say, oh, well, because Portuguese is what's called the transparent language. It has a similar structure to Hebrew with vowels that has a one-to-one, more or less, correspondence in some way of sound to symbol. And therefore, let's look at Portuguese, and we see Linnea Eri, the founder of and creator of something called orthographic mapping, one of the great leaders of educational research in reading, says, really, just in languages, just like Hebrew with vowels, you should teach at the phonemic level. A word like dag, d, a, g. Sound it out and be able to do it at the phonemic level. Amazing. That would be great, except great researcher in Hebrew at the University of Haifa, David Sher, has been saying for 20 years, that's not the case for Hebrew. That's not the case for Hebrew with vowels. It's not the case for Hebrew without vowels. Okay, great. David gets all upset at this 2021 finding and publication, and I'm in touch with Linnea Eri and with David Sher, and they're fighting it out in the research articles. It's really exciting. I'm sure all of you are sitting at the edge of your seats for this, but this is how us nerdy researchers have fun. So, you know, Abu Ahmad and Sher in 2024 take it to Linnea Eri and show that in Arabic, again, not Hebrew, but a language structured similar to Hebrew, actually, in fact, you really should understand the language structured in the consonant vowel unit of a syllable. And therefore, the implications for teaching Hebrew and for intervening with children with language-based learning disabilities now has more of a foundation in a different way than English. And therefore, interventionists need to be trained uniquely, not only in the science of reading and in language-based learning disabilities and second language acquisition and in Hebrew, but understand the unique aspects of how it is that the science of reading and all of those other disparate literatures play out in the world of our Hebrew readers from other languages as well. And that's just a taste of what we're doing with regard to the various areas of research. Thank you.
Scott, thank you. You certainly had me on the edge of my seat. Important to know that while all of this research is behind the work that we're doing, we also will be translating these materials and making them accessible and available to the field. We'd like to now hear from Ilana Ruskay-Kidd, who's going to talk a little bit about where this goes next.
Thank you. So first of all, it's really an honor and privilege to be in this room and really among many of the leading experts on this field. And I guess all I can really bring here is sort of our own experience of having been at the Shefa School. This is our 11th year. And what I can just share is that what we have seen and learned is that, in fact, all students with language-based learning disabilities struggle with Hebrew. And that clearly the role of Hebrew is not just about learning the language of Hebrew, but that it is sort of the critical access point to children feeling able to both learn Torah, to be able to pray, to be able to feel part of the community. And it's really, and that affects both their ability to study in Judaic studies, as well as their just sense of self and relationship and relationship to the Jewish community, both that child and their family. And I would say that the number one question that we have received over our years from other Jewish day schools is how to kind of crack this question of sort of how to help make Hebrew accessible for kids who struggle where English, and we often say that English is their second language, that in some ways already it's being difficult to be able to, if your language system is impaired and it impacts your English, it will also, of course, impact your Hebrew only more so. And so I think that through our experience and journey with Pritzat Derech, which you obviously heard a lot about here, or a beginning of about, we see both that there, while there have been, as Scott described, lots of people at work, that there hasn't been sort of agreement in the field, and sort of we're very excited to sort of see the movement and this and the coalescing together to talk to one another rather than being in silos. And I think our goal is very much that we feel that we have an opportunity at Shefa, working with Pritzat Derech and very closely with Scott Goldberg, and through that research to really, we're sort of a lab, right? Our school is full of kids with language-based learning disabilities. And so our hope certainly is both, we are right now currently piloting this program that Evan Kriya, which wasn't discussed, but is part of sort of that, an outgrowth of understanding sort of the ways in which struggling students can learn Hebrew most successfully. And that through our knowledge and expertise working with language-based learning, students with language-based learning disabilities in day school settings, and then through piloting, testing, collecting data, continuing to iterate. What we're learning this year has been already remarkable, and it's only December, and we're excited that over these next couple of years to continue to refine what it is that works and what we will be able to then more confidently be able to share, develop scalable models, and then to really be able to train so that children who aren't, first of all, not every child needs to come to the Shefa school or the equivalent of such a school. Many children come from all over the country and beyond. And so that the hope is that for lots of those students, that could be 10, 20% in any classroom who are struggling, that for them to be able to find access points into the Hebrew language and into Jewish life will be something that we're really just excited and feel like we're sort of at the precipice of something very important that I hope will really make a difference, not just for today, but sort of for lasting generations ahead. So thank you, and I'm excited to be a part of this community and hope that we will be able to get more support so that we can do more of this kind of work.
Thank you, Alana. We would love to open the room for questions or comments. You can raise your hand or you can post something in the chat.
I'll go ahead and get us started. Hi, I'm Sarah Levy. Sarah Rubinson Levy. I serve as the project director for this project. And while you guys are thinking about your questions, and like Andrew said, please feel free to raise your real hand, your Zoom hand, or post in the question or post in the chat. I see that we are so fortunate to be joined with most of our planning team and also a few of the people that were part of our working group. And so I'd love to pose a question to Rebecca Ritter, who is in this group. She is also with the Shefa School. She is on our planning team. Rebecca, I would just love to hear from your perspective the impact that you believe that this work will have on the field. And Brian Kunle, you're next. I'm going to pose the same question to you. Would love to hear from you as well. Brian and Rebecca are both part of our planning team, and we've not had the opportunity to hear from them yet. So, Rebecca, the impact of this work.
There we go. I wasn't allowed to unmute myself. I feel like that's some sort of like sign, Andrew. Yeah, I mean, I think just on behalf of the planning team, there were five members, 6 members on the planning team. And I would say we've spent probably hundreds, maybe thousands of hours together at this point over the past 18 months or so. I think for me, the most immediate impact has just been kind of the cross-fertilization of ideas from each other. We each come from slightly different parts of this field. And I think what Scott alluded to earlier when we were talking about the research was just how many distinct parts there are to this very complex issue. And no one person really has expertise on all of the different components that go into this issue. And so I think for kind of in the short term, the impact of us just collaborating with one another and talking with each other, and also with our work with the planning team, working. We're the planning team. We're the working. Which one is what? One of us
You're
is
on
the
the
work.
planning team.
We're the planning team. The working group, the larger group, many of whom are on this call, each of whom contribute additional layers of expertise to this question. I think it's really the first time that all of these people have been kind of in a room together. And so the opportunity now for, okay, we have these relationships, we're developing some shared understandings, we're developing some common language, we're sharing out some research. That's how a field is really built, right? I mean, there wasn't really a field for this beforehand. And so I think that's really been a huge opportunity. And then the other thing I would say was the connection between research and practice. So I'm a practitioner at the Sheffield School, and what we're doing now is really using the research that's coming out of the Pritzat Derech initiative to inform, in kind of a action research type way, the kind of instruction that we're implementing with our students. And so that, I think, for practitioners who are out there who say, you know, the research is inaccessible, which it largely is, to be able to make that bridge really clear, I think, has been tremendously impactful.
Great, thank you. Brian.
I think anyone who works with me knows that I often take that long view of thinking about things. And the thing that I've been continuously talking about and thinking about is those students who currently don't get to have a Jewish education in the way they would like or their family would like. The tiers that families have because they aren't able to access Hebrew, they aren't able to participate in Jewish day schools in a meaningful way that they want to. That because we're building this field, because of those things Rebecca just talked about, the breaking down of silos and connecting, those students now are going to be able to have that opportunity. They're going to be able to learn Hebrew. They're going to be able to have meaningful opportunities to participate in Jewish life in a way that I would argue throughout Jewish history, these students maybe never have had, and now will in our future, starting even now, are getting the opportunity to do. So that's what keeps me excited and keeps me coming back to this project is, less and less kids and families crying because they can't participate, and now they have the meaningful connection.
Cool, thank you so much. I see a question from Rebecca Hinden.
Hello, thank you so much. It's Rebecca Hinden from Greater Metro West Jewish Federation. And I guess my question's directed at Andrew, but happy to hear from anybody. It's something Andrew and I had started a conversation about, and it would be so helpful if you could expand or just to hear about it more broadly from anybody else. I also just want to take a moment and thank everybody who's been part of the planning of this. No matter where it goes, wherever it goes, it's fascinating and important and interesting to see how it can potentially impact our field. So thank you to everybody who's been part of the planning of this. So on a community level, as we think about where to invest our community dollars, we think about what the impact will be broadly on our schools. My question is how this program can impact not only those with language-based learning difficulties, but all of the students in our schools as we sort of think about, like I said, the investment of dollars or where to put our resources, whether that's actual dollars or time, staff time, teaching time, whatever it is. Can you give us a better sense of how this is going to help our broader school community, please?
Great,
Yeah,
Rebecca.
I'll actually take this one. So
Oh.
I've been in the field of Jewish education for nearly 20 years, serving as a teacher and an administrator overseeing Judaics and Hebrew programs and a head of school. And one of the challenges that I have experienced in virtually every school that I have worked with is the Hebrew program, is taking teachers who are deeply, deeply passionate, but maybe don't have the training to work with students, even at a tier 1, even with the full classes. And so while this initiative is specifically worked on or aiming at working with the students with dyslexia and language-based learning challenges, when we think about what's good for them, it's actually good for all of our students. So when we talk about differentiation, when we talk about meeting the needs of individual students, when we talk about raising the bar of the professional development and the education that we're giving our Hebrew teachers, that impacts the entire system. And also in spaces where I have worked on work in professional development with my Hebrew teachers, it actually raises the bar for teachers as a whole. With some of the, before I worked with Hebrew at the Center in this project, I also worked with Hebrew at the Center in schools that I worked in. And one of the impacts that that had is the general studies teachers looking at the work that we did with Hebrew at the Center, with professionalizing the teachers, with database decision, with assessment, and our general studies teachers were introduced to this whole field as well. So as we approach this process with Pritzat Derech and professionalizing this field and investing this, it has a ripple effect in the culture of the school in general.
I not only do I fully concur with Sarah, I think all students in our schools need to believe that they belong in communities that are inclusive. And I wouldn't minimize the impact that we would want all of our students, all of our teachers, all of our families to feel that we want to broaden the tent as much as we possibly can, because we have the right tools that will allow more and more students to be successful. And we would hope that that is something that is brought to all the schools and not just stronger pedagogic instruction around Hebrew language learning.
Thank you. We had a question whose hand went down, Nathan. So let me know if you still have your question, but I'm looking in the chat and Naama posted, Naama, who is part of also of our working group. I am wondering about supporting the interplay between orthographic reading and foundation of comprehension. And Rebecca, I would love if you could take a minute to address that.
Sure. Nama and I have had this conversation before, so I'll just share it with the larger group. And Nama is one of the experts who weighs in on this question. For those who are not directly familiar with some of the terminology in the question is basically how do you kind of balance the interplay of decoding, meaning just like kind of reading the words off the page, and comprehension, actually being able to understand what it is that you're reading. And we know that reading is a language task. It's part of why it's so challenging for students who are English speaking in the diaspora to be able to pick up Hebrew reading and language, because it's not, something that they're necessarily hearing outside of school or sometimes even in school, and it doesn't build up enough kind of foundation of language for them to be able to rely on that as they're reading. So I would just say, the question of sort of like decoding on the one hand and comprehension on the other hand, the research does not support the notion that decoding should be taught kind of independent of any sort of understanding of semantics and morphology of words. They really go hand in hand. And so the question then becomes, how do you prioritize instructional time when you are allocating 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever number of minutes it is in your school to Hebrew reading and Hebrew language instruction? And I would say that one of the things that we're really hoping to do as part of our kind of practical guide to the field is really come up with kind of a clear decision-making framework for school leaders to be able to say, okay, based on the mission of my school, based on why parents are sending their children to this school, based on kind of our overall pedagogical approach in our school, potentially based on our hashkafa, what are kind of the key factors we should be considering when we are making decisions about our Hebrew program? And I would say one of the things that has to be kind of at the forefront is that students with language-based learning disabilities need more time to acquire and retain skills, right? And so you have to kind of be really realistic about what the expectations should be of those students, and then how you're going to prioritize your program to align with those expectations. So, if, for example, the goal of your school is to the goal of your Hebrew program is to teach students how to read and understand biblical text, then you might be focusing on vocabulary and morphology that is occurring primarily in biblical text, and you may not be doing as much modern spoken Hebrew. I think sometimes in schools we try to do it all, and for students who have language-based learning disabilities, they're not getting any of it when we try to do it all. So being sort of unfortunately having to choose what it is that we're going to focus on means that you're choosing to not focus on other things. But our hope is that we are going to be able to provide some guidance to school leaders based on the research to say, okay, here's how you can make some reasonable, informed, evidence-based decisions about what to focus your time on, how much time, what to focus teacher training on, and then what the expected outcomes can be for students who have a variety of profiles. And we know that language-based learning disabilities is not a homogeneous group, right? And so what can you sort of expect for students with different types of profiles within this broader category?
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Unfortunately, we are out of time for questions. I see Naama raised your hand. I see more questions in the chat. Please feel free to continue putting questions in the chat, and we will make sure to address them after this call. But for the sake of time and wanting to stick with the time that you have committed to us, I would love to turn it over to Abby Pitkowski from the Covenant Foundation.
Sorry about that. Take two. Okay. Thank you so much. I saw that I was on mute. 1 second. Okay. Thank you so much for asking me just to share a few words. I will share that I know it's around lunchtime for many of us in the Eastern Coast. I was a synagogue president for a number of years. I'm used to standing in between Jews and food, saying announcements right before Kiddush, so that's not scaring me too much. So first of all, I also want to share some warm regards from our executive director, Joni Blinderman. She's not able to be here in real time, but she knows that we are meeting, and just want to share that. So again, Andrew, and thank you so much for asking me just to share a few words. We just really want to share from the Covenant Foundation that Hebrew at the Center, it's a real key partner in our work to help elevate the field of Jewish education. We know that Hebrew at the Center has a successful track record of managing multi-organizational partnerships and collaborating with partners really to develop a coordinated strategy. And we saw that Hebrew at the Center was really set to develop and field test this comprehensive approach to teaching Hebrew with Pritzat Derech, to reach many more learners and meet the needs of a broader field. And this coordinated, systematic strategy of Pritzat Derech is really, we just see it's essential to developing scalable interventions, and it's opening up Hebrew reading, and it's enabling progress in Hebrew learning and Judaic studies on a national level for students with language-based learning disabilities. It's just directing this enormous challenge that children with language-based learning disabilities in day school settings who are not adequately served. We know that they, as mentioned, they could have negative associations with Jewish learning because of their struggles with Hebrew language. And this project is really going to ensure that their associations are positive, these students feel successful, and that directly aligns with our goals. So again, just saying thank you, and just sharing that the Covenant Foundation is really very proud to support and to partner with Hebrew at the Center. Thank you.
Abby, thank you. Thank you so much. And a huge thanks to all of our presenters today. It's a wonderful team of people who are deeply dedicated to this work and to the change, the transformative change it will bring about. Of course, a huge thanks to the Covenant Foundation, the Littman Kampfer Family Foundation, and our other supporters who are enabling this to happen. And we certainly hope that others will join us in partnership at both the local and North American level. A huge thank you to all of you who joined us for this briefing to get a taste of what we're doing and the direction that we're hoping to take the field. We at Hebrew at the Center are pleased that this is only one of the field-wide initiatives that we are leading to bring about meaningful revolution in the teaching and learning and engagement of Hebrew in the Jewish educational space. We're excited to be working in day schools, in informal education locations such as camps, trips to Israel, congregational schools, and working to make certain that Hebrew becomes a more normative component of North American Jewish life, helping connect Jews to the Jewish people, to our language and culture, to Israel, to literacy. As we make our way towards Hanukkah, may we all have lots of light in our world, and may the work of Pritzat Derech lighten the learning experience for tens of thousands of children in our Jewish day schools. With that, we thank you and wish you a Chag Orim Sameach.